Not only is there a crisis, I think, in education in the UK that extends beyond independent schools or state schools and beyond that choice, but the search for appropriate state school education for children with special educational needs and disabilities, the SEND children, remains one of the most pressing challenges in the UK, and the situation is further complicated by children who, though not officially diagnosed on the SEND spectrum, still benefit from specialist support. The current landscape highlights several critical issues that families face, particularly in the light of Labour's incoming VAT policy on private schools. And one of the key challenges in the capacity of state schools to offer specialist support is simply the number of staff that are needed and the specialist skills that are required, and the way in which staff are already stretched. Many schools lack the necessary resources, funding, and the specialist staff to adequately address the individual needs of SEND children or even to assess them. For children without formal diagnoses, this becomes even more problematic as schools may not have the legal or the structural framework in place to provide tailored support, and this leaves families in difficult positions, forced to seek expensive private alternatives or risk their children not receiving the appropriate education that they need. Historically, some families have turned to specialist private schools, which often have smaller class sizes, more personalised learning plans, and most particularly dedicated SEND provision. But with the new Labour government removing independent schools' VAT exemption, there's an anticipated rise in school fees by 20%, and this will disproportionately impact families who are already spending huge amounts of money on their children with specialist needs to send them to have these needs catered to in independent schools. As parents face increased financial strain, many are already choosing not to send their children to private institutions, further exacerbating the demand for state school places, and of course exacerbating the demand for state school places can cater to children who may or may not need specialist SEND support, who may or may not be accurately diagnosed. And that is the problem. These children are going to be moving into state schools that simply aren't equipped to support them, and probably don't even have the spaces to support them in the middle of a school year. This is a chaotic arrangement. Whether you support the VAT on private schools or whether you don't, and a lot of this is about a sort of an issue about privilege, which really isn't the issue. And the issue is about timing. And the issue about privilege is another matter. And for the Labour Party then turn around, you had plenty of warning that this was going to happen, is not really fair. That's not a reasonable response. Plenty of warning. Actually, the original plan under Jeremy Corbyn was to abolish the charitable status and to effectively abolish independent education altogether. That was Rachel Reeves. Is it Rachel Reeves? No, Angela Rayner's original position. So this is very much a watered down position, but it's still a dangerous thin end of the wedge. And my concern is that by attacking the excellence of what some independent schools provide, it's not necessarily going to increase the competence of state education. What we actually need to do is to rethink the way education is presented in our country. So the problem is not limited to the affordability of private schooling. The influx of children from private schools into state institutions will increase the burden on a system already under strain. With the state sector inadequately prepared for the potential surge in demand, Particularly in specialist SEND provision, there's a risk that many children will find themselves without proper support in the middle of a school year, without the support that they need in order to thrive. And state schools, many of which are not sufficiently funded or equipped to handle additional pupils requiring that specialist support, will struggle to maintain educational standards for SEND pupils. And that is unfair to individual pupils. It's got nothing to do with whether people support the Labour Party or support the Conservative Party, or whether their parents are paying for some sort of advantage. This is about unfairness. And research has highlighted that 20,000 to 40,000 pupils could be forced out of private education due to the VAT change, and some of these children will inevitably need specialist support in state schools. And many of them will find the move from one school to another in the middle of a school year very shocking. This creates a twofold problem. Schools will need additional resources to accommodate these children, but there's also a risk that state schools may not be able to deliver the same level of personalised care that private institutions once provided. The issue is compounded for children who have not yet been officially diagnosed with SEND, but clearly benefit from targeted support, and these children risk falling through the cracks, as they may not be prioritised for SEND provisions, which are often reserved for officially diagnosed pupils. And the state system lacks the flexibility to support children who require informal yet crucial interventions. Moreover, the VAT policy may lead to a significant social divide, and that, I think, is exactly the opposite plan to the one which the Labour Party is presenting. While wealthier families may absorb the fee hikes, middle-income families with children in need of specialist care could find themselves in an untenable position. They may be priced out of private education but unable to secure sufficient support in state schools. And this will likely increase inequality in educational outcomes, as those who cannot afford specialist provision are left with fewer viable alternatives. The combination of rising fees in the private sector due to Labour's VAT policy and the already overstretched state system creates an untenable situation for many families. Before stopping, let's have a look at what happened in Parliament today on this very subject.
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I'll make sure that officials engage with him on that point. If there's anything further he would like to share, then I will happily look at that. He is right. This is a difficult area, one that we need to make sure we get right, because I'm determined to deliver a system where all children and young people have every chance and opportunity, and particularly where it comes to support for SEND, we know that we will have to work across the House, I think, to get to a much stronger and better position for our children and families.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What is the Secretary of State going to do about the capacity crisis that is rapidly emerging as tens of thousands of children are being forced out of independent schools by this government's deeply misguided VAT policy? To the extent, Madam Deputy Speaker, where you have councils like Buckinghamshire, I've got a list of 20 schools with no places whatsoever. Bristol City Council is considering buying places from an independent school to put back in the school on taxpayers' expense a child that has just recently left at the parents' expense.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we were elected on a manifesto to drive high and rising standards in our state schools. The public back our policy. We think it is right that we prioritise investment in our state schools, where the vast majority of our children go to school and where the vast majority of his constituents go to school. I'd suggest he spends a bit more time thinking about their interests.
John Glenn.
I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to improve the provision of SEND services in schools. But would she recognise that many ordinary, hard-working families make extraordinary efforts to find provision ahead of a formal assessment in independent schools as well? Would she commit to make an assessment of what levels of provision currently exist within the independent sector to satisfy special educational needs? Because it will be material to the solution that she will need to develop.
As my honourable friend has set out, we will make sure that where children have an education, health and care plan, that policy change where it comes to VAT on fees will not affect those children. What I would also say to him is, whilst I do recognise the point he makes, and I do believe that parents have a right to choose where their children go to school, The vast majority of parents in our country who send their children to state school are also ambitious and aspirational for their children as well.
Helen Morgan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Maria in my constituency has a son who was in a specialist placement, and in October last year that school said they can no longer meet his need. He hasn't been back in full-time education since then, with another head teacher locally telling me that special needs provision in Shropshire is decades behind elsewhere in the country. If she aspires for all children in the country to have their special needs met, how is she going to ensure that it happens in places that are struggling so much with funding, like Shropshire?
I recognise the challenge that the Honourable Lady sets out. A part of it is making sure that our mainstream schools are better able to cater for children with a wide range of needs. I'm very sorry to hear about the experience of her constituent, and I'm sure my right honourable friend will be happy to meet with her or to look into that further to make sure that if there's any action that can be taken to support the family.
Without significant investment in state school SEND provision, which is certainly not on offer from the projected plans of the Education Secretary and of the Chancellor, who want to use the money saved or earned from the VAT to fund additional teachers in state schools, not necessarily to develop and to prioritise SEND support. Without that significant investment and a more flexible approach to children with undiagnosed needs, many children risk educational disruption and long-term disadvantages. And I think, in addition, the situation where children may well be forced to move school in the middle of a school year is a shocking way for any education minister to behave. To impose that on children potentially is shocking. There should be some sort of raft of policies to allow for that VAT to be introduced more slowly and more reasonably, so that schools can accommodate it and parents can plan ahead. I think part of the problem that we've had in this country, in Britain, is a knee-jerk response to education for too many years. And education requires a very slow build-up and a very slow delivery, because children need to be prepared. Because under our current system, children need to be prepared and to sit exams over a 2-year or 3-year period. And so any changes need to accommodate that 2 to 3 year